Last year at this same dinner table, my father raised his glass to toast my siblings' accomplishments, then turned to me and said, "And Natalie. Well, she's still figuring things out." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That's what you do when you're the family's disappointment. I stood up and walked out. It wasn't always like this. I used to truly stubbornly believe that one day they'd see me, that if I worked hard enough, played by the rules, smiled through the jabs and silences, eventually I'd earn a seat at the table. Not just physically, but emotionally. A real seat. Acknowledged. Equal. Seen. Growing up in the Brooks household was like being drafted into a legacy you never agreed to serve. We lived in coastal Maine in a house with white columns and rooms named after the seasons. There were antique grandfather clocks, library walls lined with law books no one had read in decades, and ancestral portraits that stared down like stern judges. My father, Thomas Brooks, ran a prestigious law firm. My mother, Meredith, had once been a political advisor before settling into the full-time role of family curator, of image, of legacy, of expectations. My older brother, Daniel, was born reciting the Constitution, Harvard before he hit puberty, Yale Law by 23. He once rewrote a school policy in middle school because he felt the cafeteria rules were anti-competitive. My parents bragged about it for years. He was the golden child, the proof that the Brooks name still meant something. Then came Emily, bright, polished smile, trained for television. She was the political one, studied international relations. At Brown, joined a rising congresswoman's team straight out of college. My mother always said Emily's voice was born for press conferences. I disagreed. I thought it was engineered for them. And then there was me, Natalie, the third, the outlier, the quiet one who liked taking apart the toaster just to see how it worked. I wasn't rebellious, I just didn't fit the script. I fell in love with systems, not slogans, with problems, not politics. My idea of a good time was mapping out the most efficient route between our house and the supermarket, not for speed, but for fuel efficiency. I was obsessed with patterns, inefficiencies, logic, logistics, and my family. They treated it like I'd announced I wanted to grow up to be a parking meter. I remember when I told them I'd gotten into Carnegie Mellon. My father blinked. "That's a science school, isn't it?" My mother frowned slightly, the way someone does when they're trying to be supportive, but are genuinely confused. "But you were always so verbal." No congratulations, no pride, just vague discomfort like I'd wandered off script. At family events, I was introduced as, "This is Natalie. She's in, tech." I think no one asked what I did. No one wanted to know. But the part that really hurt wasn't what they said out loud. It was what they didn't. The silence, the omissions, the way their eyes lit up for Daniel's courtroom wins and Emily's photo ops and how they went dim when I tried to explain predictive routing or machine learning applications for medical delivery systems. Once at Thanksgiving, I tried to describe an early algorithm I was working on, a basic predictive model that optimized delivery based on real-time weather and traffic data. My father nodded politely, then asked if I'd considered getting an MBA. My mother mentioned a family friend whose daughter was doing real tech work at a consulting firm. Emily asked if my software could be used for political mailers. I laughed small and tight. I prefer real-world chaos over campaign chaos. They didn't laugh back. Over time, I learned to stop explaining, to fold myself smaller. I wore the same navy cardigan to family events, drove my reliable old sedan, brought mid-tier wine. I became as visually unremarkable as possible, because that seemed to be the only way to survive the Brooks orbit, by shrinking enough to avoid becoming a target. But in the shadows, I was building. After graduating MIT with a double major in systems engineering and applied analytics, a thesis that got published by the way I took a job at a mid-sized distribution tech firm in Ohio. Glamorous, number real, absolutely. That's where I saw how fragile the supply chain really was. I watched shipments of critical medical equipment arrive late because GPS systems didn't account for temporary road closures. I saw warehouses grind to a halt during snowstorms because no one had accounted for backup delivery routing. So I started a notebook, a plain one, brown cover, spiral bound. I called it my fix, this book. Inside, I scribbled frustrations, sketched out ideas, drew mock interfaces, algorithms, hypotheses, code snippets written in stolen weekend hours. One of those ideas became the seed for something more, something that would one day become a company. Back then, I didn't know it would change my life. I just knew I had to try. I coded nights and weekends, tested my prototype by volunteering for a local food bank's delivery program, streamlining routes so that seniors got their meals faster, hotter, fresher. No one paid me. No one noticed. But inside me, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel like a Brooks disappointment. I felt necessary. That was the beginning of Swift Route, of the long road from invisibility to impact, from being someone who delivered pizza and prototypes out of a garage to someone who would one day change how the world moves. But that journey began quietly, alone. And that loneliness, it had a weight, a shape. It followed me every time I walked into that family estate. Marble floors, smiling ancestors, polished contempt dressed as concern. I didn't go back year after year because I wanted their approval. I went because some stubborn part of me still hoped they'd surprise me. They never did. But this year, I had the surprise. That night, I pulled into the gravel driveway of the Brooks estate, the same way I always did, alone in my old sedan headlights, flicking across those grand white pillars that had always made me feel small. Inside, the lights were warm, the laughter already flowing like good wine. The annual holiday dinner was always a production curated to perfection by my mother and coordinated like a campaign by Emily. Everyone would arrive dressed for legacy pressed suits, tasteful pearls, family tartan on carefully chosen accessories, and me plain navy dress, simple heels, same cardigan, same everything, intentional, because nothing about me looked different, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Let them think I was still the harmless one, the forgettable one, the one they paused out of the family trust. Let them believe it for one more night. Inside, everything was familiar. The marble foyer with the chandelier that had once made me dizzy as a child. The smell of cedar and cranberry candles lit on every polished surface. The faint strains of piano music playing on a curated Spotify playlist called Elegant Winter. A scene designed for prestige. They greeted me the same way they always did. Look who made it on time, Emily said with a cheek kiss that barely touched my skin. Daniel gave a nod. Still in logistics, I smiled. Still moving things you wouldn't know how to find. No one laughed. Dinner began the same way it always did, seated by hierarchy, not affection. My father at the head of the long mahogany table, my mother at the opposite end like a queen overseeing her realm. Daniel and Emily seated beside them, already locked into a rhythm of confident political chatter. I was seated near the far end next to a floral centerpiece tall enough to partially block my view. Probably intentional. The first course arrived sea base, flown in from somewhere my mother could pronounce but not locate on a map. Glasses clinked. Compliments flowed. Emily announced she'd been invited to a White House roundtable on healthcare reform. Daniel had just recorded a podcast with a senator, something about bipartisan finance policy. My parents beamed. Toasts were raised. And then, like clockwork, my father cleared his throat. The Brooks family signal. Time for announcements. Time for legacy. We wanted to take a moment to talk about some updates to the family's financial structure. He began swirling his Bordeaux like a man conducting a board meeting. With Daniel preparing to run for Congress and Emily's impressive strides in the political sphere, your mother and I felt it was time to begin distributing certain trust assets. Daniel straightened. Emily lit up like a Christmas display. To Daniel, my father continued, "We are transferring the Nantucket property, effective January. More clinks. Applause. To Emily, your education fund has been converted into a long-term asset portfolio with our advisors. You'll find the details in your inbox. Applause again. Then the room shifted. My mother's jaw tightened. Daniel looked down for a beat. Emily sipped her wine like she already knew, and finally my father turned to me. And Natalie? He paused. That diplomatic tone, the one he used for bad press releases. We've decided it's best to withhold any major allocations until there's more clarity around your professional path. Clarity. As if I was a fog, as if the last 10 years had been nothing but dithering in the dark. My mother jumped in quick and rehearsed. This isn't a punishment, darling. We just think it's time you made some more traditional decisions. Something stable, visible. Daniel added, your work isn't really public nat. Hard for the advisors to evaluate. Emily chimed in, perfectly composed. It's probably for the best. Startups are risky. Startups are risky. They had practiced this. A coordinated financial erasure with lobster bisque and linen napkins. I placed my fork down calmly, deliberately. Just so I understand, I said voice even. You're cutting me off from the trust because I haven't followed the family template. Not cutting off, my mother insisted twisting her wedding band, just pausing. No vacation property, no asset portfolio, no family fund stake I listed, but not cutting off. The silence was a wall, thick, pressurized, waiting for me to break. But I didn't. Not this time. I smiled, understood. And that's when my phone began to buzz. Once, twice, then 3 times in quick succession. Not normal. I glanced down. Alicia Thompson, my COO. The person under strict orders never to call during family dinners unless it was urgent. I stood slowly. Excuse me for a moment, I said, napkin folded on my plate. My father exhaled, annoyed, impatient. Really, Natalie. But I was already walking toward the doorway, phone pressed to my ear. Alicia, I whispered. Her voice came through clear, crisp, and loud enough for the room behind me to hear. Natalie, Softbank just confirmed. 40 million, the wire's in, the valuation is official, 100 million pre-IPO. Silence exploded behind me like glass. I froze mid-step. So did time. Wait. Alicia continued, unaware she now had an audience of legacy vultures holding forks mid-air. Goldman wants to finalize the Series B press release tonight. Also, your Forbes interview for top 30 under 30 founders is locked for Monday. And she paused the Tokyo teams, asking if you're ready to expand into Asia next quarter. I turned slowly, eyes sweeping the table. My father's glass hovered mid-air. My mother's fork was frozen inches from her mouth. Daniel blinked, trying to process. Emily's expression was pure disbelief, like watching a controlled burn veer wildly off script. I nodded into the phone. That's fantastic news, I said clearly. Let's schedule the team call in the morning. Tell Goldman I'll send over my final notes tonight. Got it, CEO Alicia said brightly. Talk soon. I ended the call and walked calmly, quietly back to my seat. The quiet wasn't just awkward, it was seismic. Then, breaking through the stunned silence, Aunt Claire, always the only human being at these dinners, raised her glass with a grin. Well, she said, I think that deserves a real toast. I met her eyes. She winked. The rest of them, they were still frozen. Because in that moment, I wasn't the forgotten logistics girl anymore. I was the woman who had just built something they couldn't ignore. I didn't sit back down immediately. I let the silence breathe, let them stew in it. My father's fingers were still curled around the stem of his wine glass, like he wasn't sure whether to drink from it or drop it. My mother's expression had softened, not in affection, but calculation. The mask she wore at charity galas when a donor changed their mind mid-event. Emily's eyes flicked to Daniel's, then to mine, then to her phone. Damage control was already writing itself in her mind. And Daniel, he was still blinking. I finally sat, smoothed the napkin back across my lap like nothing had happened, took a sip of my wine slowly, let the tannins settle on my tongue while their perceptions reassembled themselves around me. That's when my mother spoke. "Natalie," she said, her voice breathy and sweet, sugar slick like a poisoned dessert. "Why didn't you tell us?" My father leaned forward, tone-clipped, but hungry. "Softbank as in Softbank and Goldman Sachs. You've been speaking to them directly." Emily's eyes had narrowed, but her lips were curling. "You're a CEO," I looked around the table. Their faces looked the same, but the air between us had shifted. The scent of roasted lamb and rosemary was still thick in the room, but something else had surfaced like ozone before lightning. My mother's ringed fingers rested lightly on the tablecloth, a rehearsed picture of maternal support. I smiled ever so slightly. "I thought you said startups were risky." No one laughed this time. Daniel recovered first posture, straightening like he was on a debate stage. "Natalie, we should have had this conversation earlier," he began, voice smooth measured. "If you'd told us your company was doing so well, we could have coordinated a family investment, helped you scale faster, helped me scale." The same man who couldn't be bothered to show up to my graduation now wanted in on my Series B. Emily jumped in. "Goldman Sachs gives this real visibility. We could position this as a Brooks Family Innovation Initiative. I have donors who'd love to attach themselves to a forward-looking tech venture." My mother nodded gently, placing her hand over mine. "Sweetheart, I know we've been cautious, but you have to understand we were just worried. Startups fail. We didn't want you to get hurt." I looked down at her hand. Perfect nails, polished, gleaming wedding ring. That hand had signed documents that removed me from access to the trust only hours ago. It was the same hand that applauded Daniel's campaigns and helped Emily draft fundraising emails. The same hand that had always been so quick to redirect my path gently but firmly into someone else's lane. I slid mine out from under hers. "You were worried," I repeated. "That's funny. No one's asked how I'm doing in years." Their faces tightened. "You weren't worried about me." I continued softly but clearly. "You were embarrassed by me. You laughed when I said I was building software. You called it a hobby. You told people I was between jobs even when I was leading a logistics transformation pilot across 10 states. Daniel shifted. "Come on, Nat, you know we were just teasing." "No," I said, holding up a hand. "You were diminishing me because it made you feel more comfortable. And now that there's money involved now, I'm not embarrassing anymore. Now I'm a strategic asset." Emily's face actually fell like she'd been slapped. "That's not fair. We've always believed in you." I turned toward her. "Really, name my company." Silence. No one moved. No one breathed. "It's SwiftRoute," I said. "We optimize last-mile delivery for medical supply chains using AI-driven predictive modeling. We currently operate in 27 states with over 200 distribution partners and a 96% fulfillment success rate." My father nodded slowly. "That's impressive." "Yes," I replied. "It is." He leaned forward, slipping back into boardroom mode. "Well, then, we should revisit your position in the trust. Clearly, the situation has evolved." "No," I said. "It hasn't." He frowned. "Natalie, nothing's evolved in the last 20 minutes except your perception of me," I said. "I've been building this company for years, and until now, you didn't care. You dismissed it. You dismissed me. That doesn't change because Softbank wrote a check. You're overreacting." My mother said, her voice softening. "No," I said firmly. "I'm responding. There's a difference." Daniel opened his mouth again, but I cut him off. "Let me be clear," I said. "I'm not looking for a family stake. I don't want your board seats. I'm not interested in political co-branding or being paraded around like a campaign mascot. SwiftRoute is fully funded, our board is full, and our investors believe in our vision because they saw it before it was valuable." Emily's voice cracked just slightly. "So what now? We're not part of your success story." I looked at her then, at the table, at the polished crystal, the silverware, the monogrammed cloth. Napkins, the family name stitched into everything. "You're not part of this story," I said, "because you didn't want to be when it actually mattered." Then I stood. I have a team call in the morning with real stakeholders, real believers. So if you'll excuse me. My father stood half rising from his chair. We should talk this through. We did, I said, turning toward the door, over sea bass and betrayal. And I walked out. The hallway was cold, quiet. I felt the air change as I passed through it like something unspoken had finally cracked. My phone buzzed again, another message from Alicia. Forbes cover confirmed, Tokyo expansion greenlit. Congrats, CEO. I smiled, slipped the phone into my clutch, and this time I didn't look back. The next morning my phone started buzzing before sunrise. First came the text from Daniel, lengthy, carefully composed. Nat, let's chat soon. Lots of exciting crossover potential here, would love to align our networks. Could be huge for both of us. Then Emily's voicemail. Natalie, I think we should reset. I know last night got tense, but I've always admired your drive, and I think the campaign could benefit from a story like yours. Think about it, okay? By mid-morning, my father's email arrived. Subject line, discussion proposal. The contents, a PDF breakdown of potential reintegration paths into the family trust, complete with legal language percentages and bullet points. Like I was a portfolio they'd just realized had matured. I didn't respond, not to any of it. Instead, I forwarded Alicia my notes on the Goldman release, finalized our Tokyo expansion schedule, and reviewed partnership proposals for a regional hospital system in the Midwest. The work was grounded real necessary. My family, on the other hand, had suddenly become a swirl of noise. Over the next few days, Emily called twice more. Daniel emailed an introduction to one of his political donors who loved logistics innovation. My mother sent a handwritten note sealed in gold foil with embossed initials. Let's talk soon, darling. We're all so proud, always have been. A lie gift wrapped in good stationery. But the worst was the Vineyard House invitation. They wanted to host a fundraiser for my foundation. The Brooks Foundation, named not to honor them, but to reclaim the part of me that used to ache for inclusion. I stared at the text from my mother. We read about your foundation. That's extraordinary, Natalie. Would you consider letting the family host a benefit gala at the Vineyard House this spring? We could invite donors, press legacy partners, make it a real event. I didn't respond. Instead, I called a flower shop on the edge of Cambridge, the same shop I'd worked at when I was 17, the one where I first learned how inventory systems failed, how real-world problems couldn't be fixed with speeches or appearances, but with code, with tracking, with sweat. Mrs. Reed still remembered me. "Oh, my delivery angel," she said, laughing. "You saved us from going under one Mother's Day. We still use that system. You know, I dropped off an envelope with instructions. The next day, a bouquet of white lilies was delivered to the Brooks estate, addressed to my mother. No gala invitation, no follow-up call. Just a card that read, 'Thank you for your offer. The foundation already has a venue, a warehouse, the one where I built everything you once called a phase. Warmly, Natalie.' That was the end of the beginning. The following week, we held the official announcement at our Boston headquarters. No chandeliers, no senators, no Brooks family, just the Swift Route team, a few local educators, and about 30 teenage girls from underserved high schools across New England. We gave them a full tour, let them shadow engineers walk the route modeling floor, ask questions about AI delivery patterns, medical logistics. We showed them how an algorithm could mean a diabetic getting insulin on time, how data could move more than just packages, it could move lives. Later that night, Alicia handed me a stack of thank you cards, crayon pen, glitter stickers, words that made the walls around my ribs ache. One simply read, "Thank you for proving that a girl like me can run the whole system." I tucked it into my desk drawer, right next to the trust fund letter that said I was being excluded. One piece of paper erased me. The other reminded me that I exist in ways that matter far more. And still, they kept coming. Daniel forwarded a New York Times op-ed about infrastructure modernization with the subject line, "Thought of you. Maybe you could speak on this." Emily texted Brian's campaign would still love your support, even just a quote for the healthcare platform. Think about the impact you could have with your voice amplified. Even my father broke silence with a call I didn't answer. His voicemail was brief. Natalie, we should talk. As a family. As if now we were a family again. But I didn't need their stage. I'd built my own. A week later, I flew to Baltimore to speak at an all-girls STEM academy tucked between two auto shops and a boarded-up laundromat. There were no reporters, no red carpet, just a modest auditorium, metal folding chairs, and 50 sharp-eyed girls clutching notebooks like lifelines. I told them everything. About coding in the back of a food pantry on weekends, about delivering pizza to pay for cloud storage, about watching my family toast my siblings with champagne while treating me like a hobbyist. And then I told them the truth, that warehouse they called a phase. It's now a logistics hub operating across 27 states. That hobby just crossed $100 million valuation. The family that erased me? They can't anymore. One girl in the second row, maybe 15 braids pulled into a ponytail, chipped black nail polish, raised her hand. My parents think logistics is just for truck drivers, she said. They want me to be a doctor or a lawyer, something serious. Did your family support you? The room went still. I didn't smile. I didn't soften it. No, I said. Not at first, not when it mattered. She looked down like I'd just confirmed her worst fear. But I wasn't done. Sometimes the people closest to us can't see us. I said not because we're invisible, but because they only recognize reflections of themselves. You don't have to fight them. You don't have to win them over. You just have to build something they can't deny, something so real, so yours that their understanding becomes irrelevant. She met my eyes again, and she nodded. That night, I went back to my loft. Boston Harbor outside my window. The city glowing soft gold beneath the fog. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Emily. Still hoping we can find a way to reconnect. You're doing amazing things. This time, I didn't get angry. I didn't feel hollow. I didn't even feel triumphant. I just felt done. I powered off the phone, made a cup of tea, and sat beside the window with that stack of thank you cards in my lap. Because those were my people now, not the ones who laughed at my silence, but the ones who saw what I built inside it. A few days later, I hosted a quiet dinner. Not at a resort, not in a hall with marble columns or curated wine pairings, just the warehouse, our first office, the one with the concrete floors and fold-out tables, the one that smelled like damp cardboard and late-night takeout in the early days. Now it was clean, polished, humming with energy, but I kept that first photo framed on the wall. 5 people, 1 shared heater, and a whiteboard full of algorithmic scribbles no one outside our team understood. That night, I stood at the center of the space with Alicia by my side and toasted the people who mattered, the ones who built this with me when there was nothing, when no one believed in us, when we barely believed in ourselves. There was no orchestra, no family name engraved in a bronze plaque, just laughter-shared pasta and peonies in simple glass jars. As people trickled out, Alicia handed me a bouquet. Peonies, pale blush, soft fragrance. No card. She didn't need to explain. I looked at her, and she gave me a knowing smile. A small nod. I placed them by the window, next to the framed photo of our original warehouse, the one with no heat, no furniture, just vision. The next morning, my phone buzzed again. Daniel, Emily, Mom, a group message this time. We're putting together a holiday gathering. Would love for you to come. No pressure, of course. A winking emoji, a snowflake, a picture of the family tree ornament they'd already started updating. I let the phone rest on the counter, face down. Later that afternoon, I stopped by a print shop in South Boston, picked up something I'd commissioned weeks ago before the dinner, before the Softbank confirmation, before the looks on their faces turned from pity to hunger. It was a shadow box. Inside 2 items. On the left, folded neatly, was the original letter from the family trustee, the one that informed me I would not be receiving any allocation until more clarity could be reached. On the right, taped carefully, was a handwritten card from a 15-year-old girl in Baltimore. In purple ink and messy script, it read, "Thank you for proving someone like me can run the whole system." That shadow box went on the shelf in my office, centered, illuminated, permanent. A few weeks later, I gave a talk at a logistics conference in San Diego. Keynote, packed room. I walked on stage, navy slacks, no frills. My slides weren't flashy, just numbers, impact. Routes, optimized medical supplies, delivered emergency response times, cut by minutes that mattered. Afterward, someone in the audience asked, "What was your biggest turning point?" I paused. Not MIT, not the first investor check, not even the $100 million valuation. It was that dinner. That moment when my father cleared his throat, when they handed out legacy like party favors and left me with nothing but clarity. And I said so. The biggest turning point was when I realized their love was conditional, I said, and that I didn't need it to succeed. I didn't need their validation, I needed my own. Someone clapped. Then more joined in. Not polite, not performative, but real. That night, I got back to my hotel, opened my laptop, and finalized the next phase of our Foundation satellite mentorship hubs across 5 states. Girls in Mississippi, Montana, and Michigan would now have access to engineering mentors, laptops, coding boot camps, and paid internships during the summers, all through the Brooks Foundation. But this time, the name didn't sting. It didn't feel like a borrowed label. It felt reclaimed. I had built something, not out of spite, but out of stubborn, silent power. And I wasn't going back. Weeks later, Alicia walked into my office holding a thick envelope. She looked almost sheepish. "It's from your mother," she said, placing it on my desk. "Certified, hand-delivered." I stared at it for a moment, didn't open it. I already knew what it was. An apology, most likely. Thinly veiled beneath strategy. A request to reconsider, to reconnect, to bring the family into the story. I slid it into a drawer. Not out of anger, but because I had already answered. I had already chosen. Later that evening, I visited Mrs. Reed again, the flower shop owner who gave me muffins in exchange for inventory tracking, who told me I was too smart to stay invisible. I handed her a new laptop for her granddaughter, and a check enough to keep her business afloat for a decade. I just came to say thank you, I told her, for being the first person to see me. She smiled through tears. "You were always visible, Natalie. They just didn't know where to look. And in that tiny shop with the wilting roses and hand-painted sign, I finally felt it. Not vindication, not revenge, but closure. Because this wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about becoming undeniable. It's strange how quiet victory can be. There's no applause, no confetti, no dramatic music cue. Just a calm you didn't know you were allowed to feel. I sat alone one night in my loft, the lights of Boston glittering across the harbor. My phone, always within reach, was face down, silent, on purpose. I didn't need updates, not tonight. Instead, I was rereading one of the letters from a Baltimore student. She had drawn a little version of me in the corner, curly hair, a laptop, and a speech bubble that said, "Keep going. You don't need their map, you've got your own." That drawing sits on my desk now, framed, right beside a photo of my very first office, that cold garage, with exposed pipes and a folding chair. That's where Swift Root was born, not in boardrooms, not in the family trust, but in the silence they left me with. The next time the Brooks family held a dinner, I wasn't invited, and that was fine. They still sent the yearly newsletter. Daniel was making waves in D.C. Emily had joined a national campaign. The Nantucket house was being renovated for strategic entertaining. There was a footnote at the bottom. Our youngest, Natalie, runs a tech company. No name, no detail. Just 7 vague words that tried to summarize everything they had once erased. But I didn't need the summary. I had the receipts, the warehouses, the partners, the lives touched. I had the girl from Baltimore who told me she wanted to design systems that made sure her grandma never missed a dialysis shipment again. I had the single mother from Detroit who emailed me saying she landed a job in root analysis because of our training program. I had Mrs. Reed, who now calls herself an early investor and who cries every time I send her a new customer management report we helped build for her shop. And I had me, not the girl who once stood in the corner of her own family photo, but the woman who stepped out of the frame and built her own stage. There's a word Alicia uses sometimes, infrastructure. It sounds cold, clinical. But when I think about it now, I think of it as something spiritual. The bones beneath the surface. The silent power that makes the world move even when no one's watching. That's what I became. Not flashy, not famous, but necessary. And now my last name doesn't define me. I define what it means. Brooks no longer means trust fund parties and marble foyers. Now it opens doors for girls in places my family has never heard of. Girls who dream in circuits, girls who ask too many questions, girls who don't look like the future until they build it. I never confronted my family again, because I didn't need to. The confrontation was the press release, the valuation, the white lilies on my mother's doorstep, the keynote in front of thousands, the mentorship hubs in cities they've never visited, and the story is still being written, not in holiday newsletters or family bios, but in every classroom where a girl realizes she's not strange for loving patterns, not broken for wanting to fix what others ignore, not invisible, just early. So if you're reading this or hearing it and you've ever been the Natalie in the room, let me say this clearly. You don't need their map. You don't need their applause. You need your own lane. And when you build it, don't look back. Have you ever been erased by the people who were supposed to see you? Ever been the underdog, the afterthought, the punchline until you quietly became the story? Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, like share and subscribe. Because somewhere out there, another girl is still waiting to hear it's okay to be invisible. Until the day she chooses to be undeniable.